just so people have an understanding, I know because kind of, I think when we first met, you and I were both somewhat running gaming companies, or at least you were doing
sure, yeah.
And before that, there was a couple other things. Just give us a little bit about kind of who you are, a little bit of the background, so people understand kind of where your perspectives came from.
Sure, yeah. So like I said, I grew up in the technology sector. If you have a stereotype of a kid who was in their parents' basement programming computers, you know, when they should have been out playing with other kids, that's me. It's a very cliche story. I happened to be in college in the US when the dot-com bubble hit. So if you've seen the movie The Social Network, anyone seen the movie? So I had the first half of that movie experience where we built this startup in our college dorm and, you know, got all our friends together and wrote the cool equations on those fancy whiteboards that obviously every college student would have handy. And we did all the parts that involved building an awesome product, not so much the parts about making any money. But so we started the first half of the experience. We didn't get to the point of having to sue each other because there was no proceeds to sue over. And when the dot-com bubble crashed, you know, that company was wiped out because we focused too much, we focused exclusively on how to build this amazing technology, and we just assumed customers would take care of themselves, and that didn't happen. And so I moved out to Silicon Valley after the dot-com bubble, and I started to work at venture-backed Silicon Valley startups in the virtual reality avatar space. You know, far too early. Now that's a hot area, but way too early for that to have made any sense. And what was interesting to me was that the Silicon Valley, like venture-backed startups that I worked at, basically had the same trajectory as my college dorm startup, like too much technology, not enough customers. One startup we built, you know, after 3 or 4 or 5 years of stealth R&D. By the time we launched the product for the first time, I think we had 200 employees. I think half of whom were basically in some form of customer service, in a warehouse, in anticipation of the volume of customers that were going to show up. You know, we spent all our time on the engineering time focusing on how to make the product really scalable to handle this surge of customer demand. And of course, we never had any scalability problems. But not because
customer service issues.
Yeah, or our customer service was extraordinary for the like 6 people that tried the product. So yeah, it was so interesting to me to be like, oh, this is just the same mistakes over again, but 2 orders of magnitude more expensive than what I had done in my dorm room. And I kept having that experience and eventually started to think there was a better way. And I didn't have a lot of confidence in it. I just had this kind of intuition that customers should be involved in innovation earlier than was considered normal. I thought that we should release products and test more frequently than was considered practical. And I believe that decision-making should be more scientific and less astrological, which I turned out to be by far the most controversial idea. I couldn't have imagined that at the time. Business is still very superstitious.
Why did you write the second book? What is it about?
Well, it's kind of the same story over again. So if you look at the thesis of the Lean Startup, it was really about trying to get people to think of innovation as a process. So not innovation, something that happened that one time and you got lucky, but rather continuous innovation, something that can happen over and over again so that we can use innovation as a durable competitive advantage over our competitors who don't learn as quickly as we do. And as I started to work with larger and larger organizations, first of all, it was not primarily legacy organizations at the start. It was company startups that were successful with Lean Startup all of a sudden start growing. So one of the biggest misconceptions in the world is that startups are small companies, but not by design. That's not on purpose. We don't want to be small companies. We're trying to create big companies because we want to create product market fit and scale very rapidly. So many of the early adopters of Lean Startup, when they met me for the first time, had like 5 employees in a garage. Well, they would call me back and say, hey, listen, now we have 500, 1,000, 5,000 employees, and I remember you saying something about management something, but I wasn't paying very clear attention. I was mostly focused on minimum viable product and pivots and the stuff that fits nicely on a bumper sticker. Would you come back into our company and review the management part of it? Because now we're having this problem. We've scaled up and our innovation DNA, that startup DNA, that sense of urgency is starting to dissipate and we don't know where it went. And we've started to have that conversation about what happened and how to prevent that from happening. And at the same time, a bunch of traditional organizations, including a bunch of big multinationals, were asking me to come in and help them recapture that innovative spirit that had been lost.
30 seconds on the long-term exchange, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I have a company called the Long-Term Stock Exchange, or LTSE. We're trying to create a new stock exchange from scratch that would allow companies to list and go public without the short-term pressure. So a different incentive system that would regulate the behavior of managers and their compensation, as well as investors and their holding period at the same time. Because if we can't figure out how to fix that problem in a more fundamental way, then all this management reform, it can only go so far. What actually I think is really remarkable is all senior executives are like, look, people that work in my company aren't creative. They don't have this innovative spark. I'm like, no, they're afraid to admit to you that they have that spark because you would punish them for it. People are not innately afraid of change, they're afraid of punishment. In the book I call it a startup as an atomic unit of work. A startup is a specific team structure, a specific financing structure, a specific accountability structure that works for this kind of a thing.
Not just product management.
Yeah, it's not just product management, it's the whole package. And if people want to do innovation, I think the only way it can work is when embedded in a startup structure. This is the structure we've kind of through trial and error over many years figured out that can work. And there's nothing about the management practices of Silicon Valley that can't be imported into an organization. They're not magic. They don't require Silicon Valley people to be smarter and more creative and more handsome, if we do say so ourselves. Like, just regular people operating a different playbook. Anybody can operate that playbook if they're willing to follow the structural rules that are required to do it.